That's good. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, also known as Nerd Numbers pretty much everywhere. And we're just going to have another kind of buffet-style show this week. The NBA is back, which means we have a fire hose of information, so we have so much to discuss. We could ask for nothing better. And there are even some kind of off-court issues that are fun to discuss as well. So, Brian, I'm going to let you say, hey, as always, we're produced by our own voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. On Twitter is Boxscore Brian. Say, hey, Brian.
Yeah, what's going on, Dre? And it is the night before Halloween, December 2018. So I don't know, is that buffet going to be caramel apples and all that bad Halloween food? Maybe. To say the spookiest thing, though, even though we're not dressed up at all for Halloween, some of the defense played in the last few days has been brutal.
Nicely done.
Cavaliers, Rockets, Bulls last night. We'll be talking about that. Brutal, Dre. Very spooky.
Let's hop into that, actually, because there's a new feature I'm hoping to put on the site. One of my goals for this year is just more content. And my goal for more content is just a bit of advice to people out there, a lesson learned, even though I learned it in like year one of blogging and forget it every year, is make things simple on yourself. And so a new piece I put up that I'm hoping to keep going every Friday, Brian, is the weekly wrap up, where basically I shoot off an email to, you, Patrick, Andrew, might add a few others in there eventually, and just say, give me your thoughts of the week. And the warning I gave to all of you after the fact, so I should have been a little nicer, is I'm going to do very little editing. So as an example, Patrick's reply was, holy cow, is Giannis having one of the best starts ever? He looks like Wilt out there. And I thought it was actually very apt because his numbers, just like as an aggregate, if you did the stupid thing, I hate these on Twitter so much, Brian, where someone says, player A, 25 points, 10 rebounds, 3 assists. Player B, 27 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. Who's better? And, I want to raise my hand and go, well, I really need to know shooting efficiency. I really need to know turnover rate for that assist to turnover. I really need to know position because, if they're getting 4 assists as a point guard, what are they doing? If they're getting 4 assists as a center, that's amazing. So from that perspective, right, from the Twitter, oh my gosh, isn't this person amazing? Giannis looked great. He's turned into almost what we call like the Brian and Dre star level. So reminder, we use the wins produced formula around here. That's wins per 48. Twice as good as an average player is 200 because an average player is 100. That's a Brian star, a Dre star, as you'd put up 10 wins in a season, a full 82 regular game season, because if you had basically 5 starters that were stars, you'd have a 50-win team. Or if you had like 2 stars on a squad with a bunch of average players, you'd have a 50-win team. Giannis is turning back into that, and he's traditionally been there. But he had kind of a rough start, and the answer was he started doing something that everybody has been complaining Ben Simmons should do. They've said, take a three, take a three. He started taking 4 threes a game, and he was shooting between 6 and 10% at that rate. And that's horrible. And I mean, that's a funny thing is that it's the way the rules in the NBA work. And I certainly understand it gets a little odd, but rest assured the math calculates it out because we count made shots. A missed shot is essentially a turnover. You are ending, you are responsible for ending possession. And the difference between a shot and a turnover is some percentage of the time that shot gets turned into a basket. And then, of course, I could maybe see this is a rough one, Brian, because I've heard this argument before and I hate it. It's called the Kobe assist. The idea that a missed shot can be rebounded by your team and put back. So it's better to have a missed shot.
This is a Kurt Goldsberry article original, right? Called the Kobe assist.
Well, he kind of he did something very well, which is, named it and put it out there. But I've heard this logic before. In fact, I heard some people back in the day noted this about Russell Westbrook, which is his shooting efficiency was bad. But if you looked at the play-by-play data, if you looked at the time clock data, essentially the longer, this was before he took off and turned into the triple-double machine. The longer Russell Westbrook held the ball, the more likely he was to turn it over. In fact, that was one of the reasons we didn't like him back in the day and thought he was overrated. I wouldn't say didn't like, but didn't think he was a star player, didn't think he was worth the max contract, etc. The thing was, his assist-to-turnover ratio was pretty pedestrian, and if you looked at his time with the ball, the longer he held the ball, the more likely he was to turn it over. So, of course, it's better for him to shoot the ball and not turn it over, and that there's a chance it goes in and there's a chance it gets rebounded. That's better than just a turnover. I hear that, but just the point is, a missed shot and a turnover, you just end the possession, and some percentage of the time the opponent gets a chance to shoot the ball. So Giannis 4 shots a game, 8%. I mean, that rounds to 0. That's essentially adding 4 turnovers a game to his box score, even if you maybe give some credit to a chance at an offensive rebound. That's down to 3, right? It's like 3 turnovers a game. That's terrible. But again, that's very Wiltish because Wilt Chamberlain was, for those that remember, could not shoot free throws. So if you look at his box score, he has this amazing shooting efficiency, and then somehow his true shooting is lower than that effective field goal because he doesn't know how to shoot free throws. So I thought it was actually apt where I said, no way in hell is this the most impressive start ever, right? He is a mediocre player right now, and he's turned to good since then because he can't shoot threes. But that is very Wilt Chamberlain-ish. But then, as I noted after the fact, I'm going to ask you, Andrew, Patrick, myself, and it's like I'm just throwing it out there. This is not a vetting. This is not me doing a lot of editing. So that's what we got from Patrick, and I liked. And of course, the funny thing about that is, and that'll be our next topic. We'll get to that, but I'll just let it know it's out there. Is the Milwaukee Bucks are playing amazing. Let's see. Well, I can't believe I'm already forgetting your topic, Brian, because I do.
Oh yeah, I've got all of them up right here. My topic, which is the second here on the list, is the Raptors MVP is Kyle Lowry, and everyone's talking about how Kawhi. Okay, here, let me just have a quick tangent, Dre, on this. Oh. This is something I wanted to get in last week, and I just didn't have enough time or forgot. The narrative of superstar players like Kawhi Leonard about their chemistry, right? So when Kevin Durant went to the Warriors, I even wrote an article about this and talked about it on the show a lot. I thought it was absurd how everyone was saying, oh, it'll take him a long time to fit into the team, and there was chemistry problems, not enough shots to go around, etc. That was absurd, of course. Durant was playing amazing in the very first week. Same thing around with Kawhi Leonard. Oh, what's going to happen with the chemistry? He's coming in here. He didn't want to be here and all that stuff. He was forced to be there. Well, looks like his chemistry is pretty good. And I think it's really because if you're one of the best players in the league, like Kevin Durant or Kawhi Leonard, you're going to look good wherever you go.
You know, a funny, just like a parable, and I've heard these weird kind of things before where you talk about like how hard it is to build around certain stars. I've mocked this at the time, but someone said, you know, it's incredibly hard to build a team around Giannis. And then I've heard like, I was hearing this and this was just baffling to me, like LeBron James is he the right fit for a team? And the thing about the truly, truly great players, for the most part, so a few examples, counterexamples will give me like Dennis Rodman, kind of DeAndre Jordan, maybe Andre Drummond. These players that are really, really good at like one or two things, defense and and in DeAndre Jordan's case, he's a low usage player. In Dennis Rodman's case, he just really didn't shoot. There are a couple players like that are really specialized, but a lot of the truly great players that universally are agreed on. This is LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, those kind of players. We call it overrated, but back in the day when Kobe was good, we'd even put Kobe on this kind of list, is they're good at everything. And so this idea that you can't put a bunch of players you can't put a player that's good at everything on a squad and they'll just immediately do well is utterly ludicrous. I think the only reason this myth persists is that, as we've noted, there may be 10 to 15 players in the NBA that we'd in each season consider elite level.
Yeah.
And then I was just going to say, mainstream people have like 30 or 40, they'll include like Carmelo Anthony. So when the cubic zirconium stars go, that's when they go, well, why didn't Allen Iverson and Melo mesh? And it's like, well, they're not. There's a reason.
Well, that was my tangent anyway. Like, Kawhi Leonard does deserve a lot of credit for helping the Raptors, but let's not forget that they were the second best point margin team last year, even ahead of the Warriors. And so far this season, it's been all about Kyle Lowry. And, I sent you this email on 5 days ago, but it's still holding up until today. I looked a little bit earlier today. Kyle Lowry is still the number one win producer in the NBA. So, yeah, the Raptors look great, and Lowry looks great.
They did fall without
Yes.
Kawhi to the Milwaukee Bucks, so there might be an argument there for cohesion or whatever. But, yeah, Kyle Lowry is playing out of his mind. The one thing that is saddening me looking at the Raptors is Jonas Valanciunas is still looking for minutes, and I had heard, he's working on a 3. Nick Nurse really liked him. I was excited about that. The good news is this is very much similar to the Golden State Warriors. If you just have a glut of talent, you can be inefficient and still be a great team and still win your division and still win your conference. It's just it pains us so much to see good players being wasted.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's so early. We'll see what happens. Like, I'm going to talk a little bit later about trends in the Warriors lineups, but they're just trying stuff out. They won't stay that way the whole season. So, but you're right. For the Raptors, it's hard to find any weaknesses, but that might be one: unwillingness to give Valanciunas more minutes.
Well, we'll see how it affects them in the playoffs. If they're playing Serge Ibaka instead of Valanciunas, there might be matchups that hurt them. We haven't talked this much yet, and actually I haven't even looked at it in depth, so maybe for a future show. So we'll put a pin in it, but I'll at least throw it out there, is the 76ers, after being the best thing since sliced bread, are not looking as good. And it is careful to temper our expectations. You were noting we're still really early season. Under 10 games does not mean much of anything, especially when we get to the Bucks, we'll note this, it's really hard to gauge their competition, right? If they've played mostly bad teams and a Raptors without their star, how much information can you really get out of that? And actually, what I loved is we were talking SRS last week. Jeremy Britton pinged me and said, SRS is starting to normalize, but I think the Bucks are at a 16.5 SRS right now. And
let's go to the board, Dre. Let's do it. We've got Basketball Reference open right now. They are at 16.36 in first place. The Nuggets, 11.73, Golden State right behind. So that's a pretty big margin they still have.
Well, and then what are the worst in the league right now?
Yeah, so we've got them a little lower on the script, but I had some optimism, in the preseason. But the Cleveland Cavaliers, now that Kevin Love's going to miss a lot of time, they're at about almost negative 16 themselves. They are in 30th.
So as a reminder to those from last week, SRS is the simple rating system, which isn't all that simple, but the logic behind it is you take a team's point margin per 100 possessions, factor in their strength of schedule, so you look at their competition, and that's how much you would essentially expect them to beat an average team on a neutral court in a 100-possession game.
And this is the number one thing that will predict winning in the future for a team, right?
Well, it's what relates to wins, and of course, a good SR. There's a funny metric that a lot of people enjoy using, including 538, called the ELO rating. And I don't know if it originated in chess, but I know it from chess. And I don't know if it was used originally in Facebook, but I know in the movie about Facebook, the social network, they bring it up. And so this idea is, I give Brian a rating of skill. I give Dre a rating of skill. I'm 1,600, you're 1,000. I forget it might be as simple as adding it and dividing by 2 or something, but basically.
Well, so when you play your first tournament game, for whatever game it is, chess or anything else, you start out with a base number.
Yeah, and then basically I look at the strength of my competitor, and every time I win, I basically take some ratio of my rating versus my competitors, and that dictates how many points I gain if I win or lose if I lose. So the idea being, for instance, if I have in chess, it gets close to the very best in the world. They're starting to get close to 3,000. I think I'd be shocked if Magnus Carlsen has surpassed that, but I know he has the highest rating all time. So, near 3,000, and say a novice would be near 1,000. If a 3,000 player beats a 1,000, I don't even think they get any points from it. I think they get 0 because they're just expected to win 99.99% of the time. But if a 1,000 person beats a 3,000, there is a huge rating jump between the two. So, this is very popular to use in sports, but the reason it's flawed is there is no point when Magnus Carlsen suddenly loses part of his brain. Whereas if I'm using an ELO rating for the Cleveland Cavaliers and LeBron James is out injured or hurt or leaves the team or is traded, that greatly changes, and we know it. So I've always been a little iffy using this ELO. So when we're talking SRS, we really like using it, and it does tend to be predictive, but the reason it's predictive is because it's based on players, and that's what makes it hard, right? Obviously, last season, the Cleveland Cavaliers didn't have one of the best SRSs. In fact, we lamented this. The East has put up some of the worst competitors, if we're talking tributes via Hunger Games to send to the finals. The East has put up some horrible tributes the last 5 seasons. They did manage to swing away with one because LeBron is LeBron, but they've had some of the lower SRSs. But Cleveland's SRS, I think, was around 2 last season. They're at negative 16 right now. But then another important thing to notice is that an average season, the bounds have been in NBA history plus 10, minus 10, somewhere in that range. They're at plus 16, minus 16. A week ago, they were plus 30, minus 30. So we still haven't really normalized to an area that we're comfortable with, which means it gets really hard. And we've noticed some wonkiness in the SRS because essentially a team can blow out another team by 30 and then lose to another team. And now you've got all sorts of weirdness on SRS. So you have been very careful, both the pre-show and on-show, Brian, to say, at least for the first couple of weeks, despite the fact that we're making observations, we're still saying we don't have a large enough sample size to be concrete, even if we come out saying concrete things.
Yeah, and all I want to achieve really is to say, what do these small sample non-concrete things actually mean, right? Is that 1-4 team really, as bad as being a 1-4 team? So that's why I love these kind of conversations. And I want to get back to something you started with on this about the Bucks SRS, Dre, and I'll get this page back up again here. So they are number one in SRS, right? But if we go over to strength of schedule and sort by that, they are kind of middle of the road here. So they have had a little bit of a weaker schedule. What they're doing it with is this massive margin of victory, right? They have a 15.8, raw margin of victory. That's pretty insane. Interestingly, the Warriors are up to number 2 now, and they themselves have come to have a weak schedule. So, yeah, the teams like the Nuggets and Clippers might be looking a little better.
They're the best team in the league right now, and I don't think that they would beat the best from the West, which would probably just be the Golden State Warriors, Utah Jazz, maybe Denver Nuggets at this point. I don't think they'd beat them in a 7-game series. They don't have to give those wins back. But it is just painful to watch teams like the Rockets and the Bucks waste star players. And in fact, I think it is very common, unfortunately, with how the NBA works to have star players get their primes wasted. Kevin Garnett is the king of this. I might have an article coming out in the future about Kevin Garnett and LeBron James as just a reminder of an amazingly bad under-the-table deal by both squads that essentially ruined, I would argue, a deep playoff run, at least one more deep playoff run with their respective teams. The Cavaliers promised Carlos Boozer a better deal if he opted out of his deal. He said, okay. And then what was fascinating is he just welched and said, I'm going to take more money and go over there, and there's nothing you can do about it because you're not supposed to do that. And the Minnesota Timberwolves were even worse. They promised Joe Smith on paper an illegal deal. And then the NBA said, you're not allowed to do that. First off, Joe Smith was terrible, so doing that was ridiculous. And then as a result, they got a bunch of their assets, first-round picks, stripped from him. So we've had teams waste star players' talent just in terms of who they pick up, and then in other cases doing stupider things. It is painful to watch a team that was a healthy Chris Paul away from winning an NBA title last year just waste a season of Chris Paul, James Harden, and Clint Capella.
Yeah, and the again, small samples, but the way it's currently working out for for the Rockets through 5 games is what we have up on Boxscore Geeks right now. I think they may have played 6 in the real NBA. We'll have that next game up there, but it's the performance of this roster is just stark right now. If you just sort by wins, you have Harden, Capella, and Paul. Their top 3 win producers. You wouldn't be surprised by that. Harden is putting up, his typical Hall of Fame level per minute production so far. So he's produced almost 0.9 wins, almost 1 win so far. And that's pretty impressive to produce a full win for one player through just, 4 games, what he's played so far. We only have a few players in the whole league that have produced more than 1 win so far, right? So that's pretty damn good for James Harden. Capella and Paul have played a little bit less minutes, but very good per minute, 0.6 and 0.5 respectively wins produced. If you go down to the bottom of their roster, though, and look at these 2 guys that we warned you about, Carmelo Anthony and Eric Gordon, they are a negative 0.37 and negative 0.53 win producers. So if you add them together, that's like negating James Harden's production. It's like if you took those guys off of your team, you'd have another James Harden. I know that's oversimplifying things, but that's just kind of an example of the magnitude of how poorly those 2 guys affect wins.
There are times where the circumstance you are in puts a win or loss on your record, which just really sucks. I was complaining to you last week about how the Golden State Warriors, how they last season obviously they won the title, so they're one of the best ever. And their SRS, when healthy, was competing with the Rockets. They ended up not beating the Rockets for top SRS in the league, but when both teams were healthy, they were basically jostling at about that 9 rate, plus 9. And then, of course, Steph Curry gets injured, Kevin Durant gets injured, Klay Thompson gets injured. I think Draymond Green had some minor injuries. And so there would be times where they would go from being a great team to being a mediocre team, and they'd lose to a Northwest Division opponent of the Nuggets. And that's a win. That's a win difference in the standings. And we can even be in that situation right now where the Lakers without Rajon Rondo lose a close game to a team that's going to beat, that's going to then lose to a competitor, maybe the Kings. I don't know. The Kings are playing better than I expected to start
I think
the
the
season.
Kings are like 4-3 or something like that. It's pretty amazing.
So, I mean, I think what I would say is really rough for Lakers is to say the following thing. KCP and Kyle Kuzma maybe lighten off a little. They're not playing as hot, but they're young players. Who knows? Don't worry just yet. That's kind of all I really have, because the players are playing good and they've just had some close losses to some good teams.
Yeah, and KCP and Kuzma are mostly just shooting really badly. They're shooting like under 30% from three. They'll probably do a little bit better there. Yeah, I thought the Lakers would do a little bit better. Although that being said, things are kind of going how I thought they'd expect. McGee and Rondo would be good for them, which they have been. Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart would be good for them, which they have been. LeBron's been pretty typical of LeBron, very, very good. So I'm not too worried about them. I think they'll still be okay, but they haven't quite been as good as I thought.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have much more to say there other than we'll just have to wait and see. We kind of knew that the situation. I think without one more star player or a breakout season by someone like Lonzo Ball, we don't know where this team is really going. And that's not a problem yet. And I'm going to throw back to something I said way back in the day, which is just, I don't think LeBron James's motivation with the Lakers was to win a title. I think going to the Rockets or the Philadelphia 76ers, which if he had really wanted to, he probably could have forced, would have been his best bet. My logic, and this is my conspiracy theory, which I don't think is that conspiracy or out there, is I think LeBron James wants to get the all-time scoring record in a Lakers uniform. Because essentially, if he averages about 25 points a game, he's roughly 4 seasons from that. So that was my belief. When him going to the Lakers is he wants to beat Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's scoring record in a Lakers uniform. And he knows he can do it there, because I think that's the thing, is if he goes to the 76ers and they say, Ben Simmons is a great ball handler, Joel Embiid should get a lot of shots, can you average 15, 10, and 10 and play 32 minutes a game so you can Tim Duncan it and last long? I mean, if you look at like Tim Duncan at the end of his career, we thought Tim Duncan, basically production-wise, was a star player his entire career. Jason Kidd's a similar player. But what they did at the tail end of their careers, they said at the beginning of their career, they said, give me the ball, I'm going to average 20 to 30 points. In Tim Duncan's case, 10 to 15 rebounds. In Jason Kidd's case, right, 10 to 15 assists, something like that. And then in later years, they basically said, okay, I'm going to average 10 points a game and 8 rebounds or 7 assists or whatever, right? They said, I'm going to do what the team needs. I'm going to still be wildly productive, but I'm not going to be the guy. And so LeBron James could have done that, but I think he took the Kobe route, which I don't fault, and said, I'm going to be the guy for the rest of my career, at least the next.
Oh, man. That's so funny. It really was the Kobe route, wasn't it? Well, we'll see. I still think they could be okay. Maybe they can put something together next year, bring in a big player, but we'll see.
I'm not worried. And the good news right now, so let's just do a quick breakdown of the divisions out west, or at least the teams out west. So I mean, they are right now the Lakers are sorry, I misread the Lakers as the Clippers. I mean, the Lakers are what, 3 games back from being in the playoffs, 4 games back, right? A playoff team right now is the Memphis Grizzlies with a 3-2 record. And so what is that? And so there's 7, so you add 2. Yeah, they're like 3-4 games back. That's nothing. 3 or 4 wins. Right now they're lucky, right? The Thunder, the Rockets, and the Suns, and we thought the Rockets, the Thunder, and the Rockets were better teams than them or below them. So it's like there are some teams that we think should be at the top of the division that aren't right now. The Portland Trailblazers are playing really well, and they're going to beat the Rockets tonight. So there are some teams that can come down. I wouldn't be worried just yet.
Yeah, they're 2-5, and they have the point margin of a 3-4 team. It's not that bad.
And then the last, I've been loving it. We actually did the weekly wrap up. Got our most a lot of back and forth from Jay Gunter Brett and Dre Smooth. And we will definitely talk a little bit about Daryl Morey a little later in the show. I'm trying to think if there's more we want to say about. I've got more to say about Cleveland. Do you have more to say about Milwaukee? I think the biggest thing, I give you kind of credit for this last season, Brian, or I give you credit for the point I'm about to make, and it's related to something you said last season. If you look at the Bucks right now, the reason they are doing so amazing is essentially Ersan Ilyasova and Chris Middleton not only look like they're back, because we liked both of these players in the past, but they've been bad the last couple of seasons. Not only do they look at their back, they look like they're stars. And Giannis was, as I mentioned, the wilt point. He's turning back into his old self, but he actually had a weak first maybe 5 games because he couldn't shoot threes worth a damn. This team has looked amazing essentially because of those two players. I think Eric Bledsoe's playing really well too, but we've liked him. But essentially, they're playing like James Harden level players right now, and we don't know if we expect that to continue. Last season, the 76ers, who ended up being a 50-plus win team, part of the reason they got that, a very similar point that we were making about how even if the Bucks normalize to be a weaker team, they don't have to give those wins back. The 76ers, who we were kind of down on, and the reason they overcame expectations largely was 2 reasons. Ben Simmons played like the greatest rookie since Tim Duncan. And by that, what I mean is best rookie performance on a playoff squad. We've seen lots of great rookie performances like Andre Drummond as an example that are just wasted because they're on teams that are going back to the draft lottery. So he had the best rookie performance in a playoff squad since Tim Duncan. And Robert Covington, I keep using the James Harden point, and the reason I use that is because it's amazing scoring. Robert Covington had an amazing first 10, 20 games, right, where he was like a 300 wins produced player, 3 times as good as an average player, and was making like every 3, right? He could just throw, Harlem Globetrotting it up, just throw a ball from half court, it goes in. And at the start of the season, you were skeptical, and you basically said, I don't think Robert Covington can keep this up, which isn't unrealistic. To say, I don't think a player can shoot better than Steph Curry for a full season is not an unrealistic point. And lo and behold, he comes back down to earth. Now, he's not a bad player. He's closer to an average player, but he comes back down to earth. I think it's very reasonable to say the same thing about, say, Covington and Ilyasova, that they are not going to keep up this production for a full season.
Yeah, no, that's true. And so we can look at this hot shooting, right? I've got the Bucks shooting up here right here. Middleton shooting 57% from 3. Brogdon, 43%. John Henson, a 7-footer, shooting 41%. Brook Lopez, another 7-footer, shooting 41% from 3. Obviously, none of that is going to keep up, right? So maybe the Bucks are a little overvalued right now. However, there are some other things I'm seeing from them that I think maybe indicates they could keep it up. For one is, let's see if I've got this right here. They're number 1 in the NBA in rebounds per game by a fairly significant margin. Let's actually get this basketball reference page up again.
Because we still question their centers, right? They picked up Brook Lopez, who has not traditionally been a great rebounding big, and they still don't have like the solution at center that we want, but maybe they'll keep it up.
Yeah, so they're at 55.7 rebounds per game, 3 full more than the second place Heat, then 76ers, Trailblazers are all kind of in the low 50s, right? So they have a substantial, rebounding edge right now. They're also number 2 in the league in blocks and 4th in assists. So they're looking very good in the possession stats, Dre, not just the percentage stats. So, and you would expect that, right? Like you said, Giannis looks like Wilt. Well, he's like a small forward or whatever position he handles the ball for him. They have all these big players, and they're a good defensive team. So they also have Budenholzer, who he's kind of demurring in the press these days. Everyone's saying, oh, he fixed the team versus Jason Kidd. Maybe that's true. I'm not going to talk about coaching here, but that is a really big team that I think should be capable of playing really good defense. So, I'll be honest, like the Bucks got a lot of hype in the preseason. I was sleeping on them a little bit. I'm starting to become a believer if they're playing this good when Giannis is just kind of okay.
But compared to last year, just one interesting thing, and this offseason, the Bulls really helped him out. Jabari Parker got 700 minutes last season. That was on only 31 games and did not play well. Thon Maker got 1,200 minutes and was just downright terrible. He was up there with Carmelo Anthony and how much he's hurting a team. Thon Maker hasn't gotten any. I think he's gotten 18 minutes this season, and Jabari Parker got traded away. Yeah. So I think a couple of advantages the team has is they have some players that were unhealthy last season that have come back healthy. They've got one of the best players in the league, and we'll just have to see how it goes. I mean, the frustrating part, as I was noting, is if you have a star player like Giannis and you just have an average squad around them, I mean, Giannis is worth 20 wins on his own. Average on its own gets 40. You can be a 50 to 60 win team with just that. And the reason we don't see that as often as we'd like is teams put really weak squads around great players. The Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm going to say the lucky note, Brian, is I did precursor a prediction I made. I said I thought they were a playoff team. But then I said, they say they're going to try. They gave Kevin Love that contract. It certainly seems, if you talk Larry Nance Jr., Kevin Love, and Tristan Thompson, they certainly have some good players that could make the playoffs. And then I said, but if there's injury or anything to those players, and we've had issues with injury to Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love, who knows what happens? Kevin Love got injured really early in the season, and it looked like they just went tank mode. Like they were starting Channing Frye. And then, like, J.R. Smith is done. At this point, the wise move, if they weren't tanking, would be to just waive J.R. Smith. So the Cleveland Cavaliers, I mean, we've kind of made this note about the annoying part about where a team is, where the stupid treadmill of mediocrity meme, which we don't like, which the meme is, if you're just a team that makes the playoffs as an 8th seed year after year after year, you can't rebuild because you only get mediocre draft picks like, Giannis Antetokounmpo. And you can't get a star that way. Obviously, we think that's bullshit. Giannis and Jimmy Butler are two of the best players. Jimmy Butler was picked 30th. Giannis was picked 15th. Suck it up. Teams get better at drafting. We don't like that myth. But the problem is, if there's a team that's near the playoff realm, a lot of teams go, if I'm not going to make the playoffs, I am just going to, quit and give up on the season. And it's really hard to know when teams are going to flip that switch. And I was looking at the Cavs going, well, I don't think they have to flip that switch, but if something goes wrong, they might, and something went really wrong.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Kevin Love's out. Tristan Thompson's kind of playing mediocre. Like, who knows? Maybe he's got that in the back of his head, like, I got paid, so let's just play it out. I have no idea what his motivations are. But then if you look at all the other players getting a lot of minutes, Osman, Rodney Hood, Colin Sexton, George Hill's a little bit older, playing okay still, but the rest of these young guys are not playing well. Clarkson is getting minutes for them. So the one good thing they have going for them, which is some nice, front court guys, well, those guys are hurt, not playing very much, and then all their bad guards are playing a lot of minutes. So, yeah, things are falling apart. They fired Lou, their coach, so they may be giving up.
I actually did have some comments on this that I think I've made before, which is, it's really weird in the NBA how essentially coaches are kind of like sacrificial lambs. I don't know if this is true. I was trying to bug Dave Barry if this is true historically, but have you seen that movie Master and Commander with Russell Crowe?
No, I haven't, but I've seen memes about it. I'm sure it's an entertaining adventure movie.
Well, it's a movie about an old-timey captain back in the day, like a British naval commander. And there was something where they're not getting any wind, and they believe one of the people on the crew is cursed, and so he jumps overboard to break the curse. And I don't know if that kind of superstition is true, but it feels like that is very much the case with coaches, where with NBA coaches, they kind of say things are going badly, we have to do something, we're going to fire the coach. And that's just the most common. Now, the frustrating part is oftentimes it's a poorly run front office or even more frustratingly, just a bad owner. And essentially the GM's like, well, I'm not going to fire myself. And there's nothing you can really do to get rid of an owner. So they kind of just fire the coach to do something. And then what's annoying is a really common thing we bring up on the show is called like regression to the mean, reversion to the mean. The idea being, and this is going to come up with Klay Thompson, who we'll talk in a second, Brian, is if you have someone who's like an average 50% shooter, they're not going to shoot 50% every game. And so some games they're going to shoot really well, like 75%. Some games they might shoot really poorly, 25%. And when you see those performances, instead of saying, holy cow, they're a 75% shooter, you should say, well, it's really likely if they were well outside of their expected range, that their next game they're going to be closer to their normal range. And so a lot of times when you fire a coach, it's when you've been doing really badly. And so you get this is what happened last year. What Prunty, I think was his name, the interim coach who replaced Jason Kidd. They did really well after firing Jason Kidd. And essentially what you could say is this team was underperforming at the point Jason Kidd got fired, so we'd expect some reversion to the mean. And then they happened to go on a really easy streak of teams, like they paid the Nets twice.
Right.
So it's this kind of note where it's like you fire coaches when things are going bad. Things go a little better. You say, see, we did something. And you go, it's reversion to the mean, and that did nothing. Because to fix your team, you really need to get better players, or better front management or an owner that's going to let you do the right maneuver. And you can't really do any of these, so you just fire the coach as kind of a sacrificial lamb. And the way we know it's bullshit is there are people saying, Tyronn Lue's a good guy, is going to get another job. And we've seen this. I asked Dave Barry this right after, and I'd be curious if there has ever been an NBA coach that this hasn't happened to. Maybe David Blatt. But I think like every NBA coach, if you're fired, you get at least one more job in the NBA. Doc Rivers is an amazing coach that, has tanked multiple teams, and I'd be shocked if he doesn't get another head coaching job after the Clippers.
Yeah, I can't top that.
All right. So actually using the reversion to the mean, I get to join you, Brian, at least so far, and I even said I was going to. Preseason, I said there are a lot of cracks in this Warriors squad, so I'm not convinced they're going to be as dominant as everybody's worried about. Even last week, when we recorded last week's show, they were 2-1, and I said there might be a lot to worry about. They could be 0-3, and Klay Thompson's playing like garbage, so what do you think? And you were like, I'm not worried. They're going to do great. And you had a lot to say. And then, of course, they're now 7-1. They're the second best record in the NBA. I'd argue with a tougher schedule than the Bucks. And Klay Thompson just put up an amazing game. I have a really funny diatribe on Klay to go off on Brian to say both you are right and to also be obnoxious. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll let you talk about the Warriors.
Sure.
Here's what's fascinating. So for those that don't know, or at least to date ourselves when we recorded the show, was it 2 nights ago, right, Brian? Klay Thompson put up 14 threes in 27 minutes of play. It was a 51-point performance. It's an NBA record on made threes.
Yeah, Monday the 29th, yep.
It was absolutely remarkable. It is probably going to win my box score of the week, just because, I think it's tough. The one thing I'm a sucker for is historical. And when you have the first player to ever make 14 threes in a game, that is really tough to top. Now, here's what's fascinating, Brian. I texted you this morning about it. He was not the best player in the game. The best player in the game was Steph Curry, who went 7 from 9 for the field, 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio with 5 assists, 8 rebounds, 3 steals, and a block. And that's out of a guard.
Yep.
And the reason I can say it right is last week we were talking about Klay Thompson in the realm of this team, and we basically said from a Moneyball perspective, and Moneyball being taking advantage of good deals and wisely spending your resources on a winning squad, Klay Thompson isn't what this team needs because they are so loaded on scoring, even three-point shooting, and he is essentially a three-point specialist. He is a designated hitter, and your team already has Christian Yelich and Jose Altuve, right? You don't, and maybe Mike Trout, right? You don't need a three-point specialist on the Warriors, even if you argue maybe his D is pretty good. He's redundant to a lot of what that team already has, and I thought nothing is more perfect than him putting up the most threes in NBA history and still not being the best player on the team. There is nothing that crystallizes that point better than Klay Thompson's specialty as redundant on the squad than saying, even when he puts up a historic game, they didn't need it because they already had Steph Curry.
Yeah, and sadly that is why I don't think he's a max player, because the reason he's been...
I want to defend him. He might be a max player. He should not be given the max by the current Warriors.
Well, so he's going to get that money, and I wouldn't do it if I were a GM, is all I'm trying to say. And the reason for it is, so if you look at what has his problem been so far this year, basically, he just has been missing all of his threes, right? Like he had made 4 or 5 total for the whole year coming into this game where he made 14. So... And here's the problem with that. When he wasn't hitting his threes, he was, I looked today, he's still the 3rd biggest negative win producer in the NBA. So when he's not hitting threes, he's doing nothing for you and is a big negative win producer. If Steph Curry had gone through that stretch of bad three-point shooting that Klay had gone through, he would not have been one of the worst players in the league. He would have been doing all that other stuff you're talking about as a private control. Same thing with Russell Westbrook, right? He kind of had a bad shooting year last year. He regressed a little bit. He was still pretty good because he did all that other stuff, right? So
you said, like Russell Westbrook, even at his peak, even his MVP season, he's been like average as a scorer, but we say, you know what? If you're average as a scorer and really good at everything else, that perks up for it. As you're mentioning Klay, now the one thing you might be able to give him is on-ball defense. But that being said, yeah, that was what was remarkable to me, right? He scores 50 some odd points, And you look at the right side of the box score, right? The left side is points. You look at the right side, that's rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, turnovers. And you're like, he didn't do anything else there. There's nothing over there. And that is all, Klay, like I mentioned, if this was baseball and there's a designated hitter, Klay's amazing. But because players do have to do other things, Klay has just never been great at that. And that's why not only do I agree with your point, it's like, yeah, you don't need him because the stuff he does really well, you already have. And the stuff he doesn't do, you really do need.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree. I mean, he had a great game, right? You do, if he played like that every game, you'd never lose a game. But you just have to look at what's happening in total, right? And in total, he's not having games like that very often. So, we'll see, right? We need a lot more games to average this out. We know he's going to have super terrible games and super good games scattered throughout the season. It's just kind of a weird thing that he happens to have really bad games and really good games all right at the start of the season. And here's one thing that killed, the main thing I want to talk about on this actually is a quote. The headline from the ESPN article on this is Klay fell for a logical fallacy. He said, "I just knew I was in for a big night." And Dre, tell us why he wasn't due for a big night. He should have just expected to play how well he normally plays, right?
Well, I mean, what you're talking about, what we're saying is this idea of regression to the mean and whatever.
Is it the gambler's fallacy, Dre? Which one is it?
For sure, yeah. When you're basically saying, if I've been running cold, I'm due for a hit, and unless it's explicitly rigged that way, which, for instance, some back in the day. So this isn't the case anymore, which is what makes it rough. This is so people actually might have been right to believe this at one point about slot machines. So a slot machine might say, I'm supposed to pay out every 100 or something.
Oh, okay.
Old school slot machines, maybe the way that was coded was mechanically, and every 100th time or whatever it would pay out. And so if you saw a machine that hadn't paid out, you go play because you know it's due. New ones are controlled by computer things with a random number generator in there that just has to be set at a certain level. So it's exactly like you're saying. Klay Thompson has a 1 in X shot of having a game that good, has a 1 in Y shot of having his normal game. And that's why his fallacy is he's going, I've been playing bad, so I'm set to be on the other side of the curve. And it's basically, if you view every game as independent, which you should, he has the same odds of having that kind of game as he has the others. And in fact, what's even rough is if he's been running cold, he might just go back to his normal self for the rest of the season, like you're saying, and he just got unlucky, right? He just had a couple of really bad breaks. We've seen that with some teams before, right? Where the Timberwolves back in the day are kings of this on the left side of the curve, meaning playing bad. The Memphis Grizzlies, as we've noted, have been on the right side of the curve, meaning playing good, where you have a couple games bounce your way that shouldn't, and that's more than you would expect, and then you end the season being above average or below average as a result.
And I want to add a small piece of nuance there. We're just saying, from an absolute truth kind of perspective. From a basketball or coaching perspective, I think you absolutely want him to have that attitude. You don't want him to say, well, I guess I just suck now. I'll never make a three again. You want him to keep positive. So I guess it's good he has that attitude from a basketball perspective, even if it's a fallacy.
Yeah, I've compared this to doctors on the show Scrubs, which is called one of the most realistic doctor shows. They talk, some of the best surgeons are just kind of the meatheads because they don't get in their own head. And I've thought a lot about how that relates to professional athletes because it is really, really hard to know numbers absolutely. I made this point about Donovan Mitchell, where my complaint about Donovan Mitchell is essentially he makes 2 fewer three-pointers every 15 games than I want him to. And you can't aggregate that on a game-by-game level. So the players that are really good, right, when James Harden has a bad game, he has to say, I'm good, I'm going to keep doing it. And that's why we get these players in the NBA that we think are bad that are still willing to hook up 15 shots, because to have the mentality to make it to the NBA means you have to be able to have a horrible game or miss a shot and still be willing to take the next shot. So it's really rough because for the good players, they need that mentality to succeed. But for the bad players that are just not what we want doing it, they still have that mentality and it's really rough. And so to the Klay Thompson point, and he is that, right? He is one of the greatest three-point shooters in NBA history. He has to have that mentality if we want to be able to make threes. You have some more topics on the Golden State Warriors, Brian, that I am loving. So let's hear them. Let's hear about how they're actually playing tall ball.
Oh, yeah. And, I wish Klay the best. He's great. He's like the most Bay Area guy possible, and everyone loves him here, so I hope he does well. I just got to keep it real. I'm sorry, Klay.
Well, we are always in a rough position. We're going to end with Jimmy Butler after you talk your Warriors topics. And what we've said, it frustrates us, is we might be morally or in many other ways on Jimmy Butler's side. But then when but on this show, because it's like a Moneyball show and an analytics show and a stat show, we're often taking the perspective of what should I do as a GM? What should I do as a coach? What should I do as a player that wants to win a title?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It's the same mentality. So Klay Thompson doesn't need a title. Klay Thompson wants max salary. So, and he might want max salary in a good market with a good shot to win a title. So we're saying
he should go play for the Lakers, Dre. Just play with LeBron. His dad's the play-by-play guy. He's from LA. That would be great.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just saying it'd be great for everyone.
But yeah, but I mean that's all we're saying is we're taking the perspective that the Warriors shouldn't pay him. But as you're saying, Klay seems like a very likable guy. So if he wants to get paid and to keep shooting, go for it. But anyway, so Warriors.
Yeah, and so one last thing on that. I already have. Actually, this is a segue on the Warriors. So, you were rightfully, and I was too, actually, talking about their process for the offseason. Might have been a little bit sketchy. They just kind of let all their good big men go and didn't put any money into replacing them. And it seems, and I was kind of arguing that they might have stumbled onto some good big men anyway. So even if their process isn't great, it's kind of worked out for them in the end. And now that I'm seeing the lineups that Steve Kerr has been playing, this team just looks so good to me. And so on that last point, the Moneyball side, how are they spending their money? They're putting it almost none of it in their centers, right? So Curry, Livingston, and Quinn Cook, that's like $45 million in point guards they're spending this year. Klay Thompson on Spotrac is listed as their only shooting guard, which isn't 100% right. But anyway, that's another $19 million there. And then you have Durant and Iguodala, $30 and $16 million, respectively, at small forwards. That's a lot of money sunk into their 1, 2, and 3 positions, right? Power forward, you've only got Draymond Green making $17 million, and then centers, Cousins is making the most, right, at the $5 million minimum. So, yeah, so this seems like a bad choice to me, that they're spending almost no money on bigs and all money on smalls. But these lineups they're playing are very, very big. Last year when I'm complaining about their lineups, I'm saying, well, Andre Iguodala at power forward, that's a little bit rough. Now we're seeing him at shooting guard. So the players' heights are not that different maybe necessarily from last year, but the types of players they're playing and the roles they're playing them in are different, and this team is looking really big. So
one player that seems to be huge right now for you guys is Damian Jones. I looked up the lineups at a Basketball Reference, and essentially here's how it goes. There's one lineup that's gotten 113 minutes.
The starting lineup, yeah.
84, and no other lineup has gotten more than 15 minutes this season. And that number one lineup is Curry. Let's see if I can read it right. Curry, Thompson, Durant. I'd say Durant, Green. You just call 3-4 together, right?
Yep.
Durant, Green with Damian Jones as center, and that lineup is doing spectacularly right. That
lineup is more than all other lineups combined minute wise. So what I worry. Oh, go ahead, Dre. Sorry.
I was going to say not quite because they're at 384 and it's 112, but I think they only show the top 20. But yeah, so I mean,
okay, you're right. You're right.
To that point, right? When you're talking Moneyball, they do have some really talented young bigs. That's Jordan Bell, that's Damian Jones, and that's working out well for them.
Yeah. So, what I worry about with them going too small is they do something like they take Damian Jones, a 7-footer, put him in as a starter, and then they just give him lip service and basically keep him on the bench for the rest of the game. Well, yeah, like you said, he actually has been playing a lot of minutes. The only lineup they've given that many minutes to that is, I'd say, a real kind of small ball lineup, but even then in the past we've argued it's fake. It's just kind of a fake small ball lineup. It's just sort of small for them. Is that Hamptons 5 lineup, right, with Durant, Iguodala, and Green as their starting front court, right? Second most minutes, but not that many, just 14. And it doesn't seem like they've been giving that lineup a lot of run. They've liked the more breaking up the stars a little bit. But then look at this third lineup. This is the one that's really gotten me interested. Curry, Iguodala, Jerebko, Looney, and McKinney. They're giving McKinney minutes instead of guys like Nick Young and Pat McCaw, who are not on the roster anymore and are relatively tall but don't play very big, right? McKinney is only like 6'7", but he's rebounding like a center. He's blocking shots.
They listed as a small forward. Well, what's frustrating, by the way, to the small ball lineup I noted this in past, is the only real player that is an anomaly on the Warriors when we're talking height is Steph Curry. Steph Curry is so baffling in so many ways in that he is, I've called him a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Most NBA players have a big wingspan. If you take their wingspan, it's usually a couple inches bigger than their height. Steph Curry, his wingspan is like half an inch to an inch shorter than his height, and he's short, right? He's like a 6-footer. And as you've noted, despite the fact that he's short, he rebounds really well for a point guard. Despite the fact that he has no wingspan, right, which is crazy, he shoots better than anybody else. So it's kind of the unicorn on that team is Steph Curry. But they have a lot of, and they've gone for this intentionally, right? They have a lot of really big wingspan wings that are even close to being bigs. You know, Draymond Green and Kevin Durant can both legitimately play center. Kevin Durant's a 7-footer. And I know Kevin Durant, by the way, and all of these stats you're bringing up on height, he's going to be misleading because I think he's listed as 6'9" on all of the official.
Yeah, he's a lot taller than 6'9" in real life.
Go talk to Ethan Strauss about it. It's one of the things that Ethan Strauss, if you talk to him about Dwight Howard and Kevin Durant's heights, just goes nuts because he's like, Dwight Howard is not 7 foot. Kevin Durant is not 6'9". So yeah, this team is not tiny, and if they play the right guy. So it was back in the day when they were doing what you're saying, like Patrick McCaw. You don't want to have Patrick McCaw out there, period. But if you can have Kevin Durant and Draymond Green out there, that's essentially a power forward center, and anybody else you're putting out there can go wherever.
Yeah, it's like they flipped the script almost, Dre, versus the small ball amps I complained about. Before I was like, well, they're not putting in anyone over, 6'7", and everyone's smaller than that, and that's it, Now it's the opposite. Now they're not putting in anyone under 6'7". Everyone's taller. All these 6'9" guys. It's Looney and Jerebko are playing great. They can shoot threes. They can defend. They can pass. Smart guys coming off the bench. These big lineups, Dre. Jordan Bell, let's not forget about him. Same thing, right? 6'9", incredibly skilled, can pass and shoot on offense, can block shots. These lineups are really big, and the league should be terrified about these lineups. I am kind of shocked about how good they've been. I can't stress this enough.
I'm glad, because last week you were more optimistic, I was more pessimistic, and I'm glad that you're even coming back to that. I'm trying to think of any. Do you have anything else to say on the Warriors before we go to our last topic?
Let's take a quick look here. No, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. We'll see what happens. Like, things can change. DeMarcus Cousins, when he comes back, he is not a small player. I don't know if you've heard of him before, but he's very big. He's 6'10" and has big shoulders. So
he's a rough. It's funny because there are a lot of players where I make the argument. Actually, okay, let's go. I've got 2 tangents for you, Brian, that aren't on the script. So there was a game where I actually did the Donovan Mitchell fans crept out. Some of the Donovan Mitchell fans that like to mess with me on Twitter, and as I should keep stressing for both my own mentality and just to make sure it's out there in the universe, I have close to 5,000 followers. Even if you believe that 60% of them are bots, that's still a couple thousand people that follow me. I maybe get 5 to 10 people that bug me about Donovan Mitchell, which means a majority of my followers don't, and I get much more interaction on other stuff. I talked about Eric Cartman, and I got a bunch of interaction this week. So I found it's a very weird place with the internet. I was talking about this last week, Brian, where the internet's really messed us up because humans always, this is a problem humans have, which is we hear negative information easier than positive information. And the annoying part about the internet is it makes it way, way easier for negative information to reach us, and we don't have a good sense of the ratio, right? I get 2 people that yell at me about something I said and call me stupid. That has a huge mental impact on me versus me thinking to myself, oh, I put out an article that a bunch of people read, or I said something that a bunch of people liked. That doesn't hit the mentality the same. And that's a lot of people, because I notice a lot of stand-up comedians when they get bigger, like, oh, everybody's a snowflake nowadays. They can't take a joke. And you go, you have 1 million followers and 20 people yelled at you about something you said. You realize that 1 million people liked you and the other 20 didn't. And you're complaining to the world as if everybody's against you where it's only 20. I'm actually going to preemptively give my shout out to Jonathan Weiler and at the Agony of Defeat podcast, where he said he is sick of Boston fans acting like they're the underdog. I tweeted this out on the Agony of Defeat podcast, which is my shout out this week. Subscribe and upvote if you haven't. It's an amazing podcast with Jonathan Weiler, and I know his last name kind of, but I'm going to mess it up because it's like Matt Anderson, so I want to look it up correctly before I say it, even though I tried it there. But they were talking. He was saying Boston, between the Patriots, the Celtics, the Red Sox, the Bruins, they've had an amazing set of years, and I even noted that they're the only major market in the last decade to have won every major title. The Bruins have won a title in the NHL. The Patriots have obviously won multiple titles in the NFL. The Red Sox have won multiple titles in baseball, and the Celtics won in 2008, and then of course are still a title contender. So, but they act like they're the underdog. So it's like people don't have the right perception of themselves, and that's what makes things hard. And so it's kind of the same point here. So so getting back to Donovan Mitchell, some people came out to bash me because he had a really good game the other night against the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, here's what I will give you first off. I preseason have been covering my bases because I've been here before. I've been here before with Russell Westbrook. I've been here before with a couple of players. I'm trying to think before Russell Westbrook, but a couple. John Wall's another one. I've been here with a couple of players where I bashed him for being overrated, and then I see him turn into something good, and I'm like, damn it, I'm never going to live down that I called them overrated, even though I now think they're good. I've been here before with young players improving, so I fully expect Donovan Mitchell to get better. I just don't think he was an above-average rookie last season or a Rookie of the Year candidate last season by the metrics we would use to crown a Rookie of the Year. He had a really good game against the Houston Rockets and the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, the Houston Rockets were without Chris Paul. The New Orleans Pelicans were without Anthony Davis and without Elfrid Payton. So I don't know how much credit, we've been talking the small sample size theater, I don't know how much credit to give you for a good game against two teams with sieves as defenses. That being said, he had a good game, and it was a game I loved. All of the starting five on the Utah Jazz got 10 or more shots. Rudy Gobert, I think, got 10 shots and shot really well. Donovan Mitchell shot really well. This is really, really what I like. And so the idea being, I really like the idea of, I forget where I started with this, Brian, because I said it was a tangent, but just the efficient shooting by sharing the ball as opposed to having to be a chucker. And so I thought that was good. I completely forgot. I'm not even going to try and get my way back because I've got my second tangent. The second tangent I have, Brian, I saw an article on Medium about Nate Silver and polling data, and all they basically said, the key point I want to take away, and I want to relate it to basketball, is they said polling data is fundamentally flawed in that there's only I don't want to say flawed. It can only tell you so much. There's only so much you can do with now. There's only so much you can do with polling data, and that doesn't mean it's not a good model. There have been cases where polling data is a very good model, but I've noticed the same problem in basketball with things like plus minus data, where it's going, you can only use this data for what it tells you. It can't tell you what it can't tell you, which I know sounds really ridiculous, but I've seen so many people tinker with plus minus data to try and make it tell you what it can't. I've seen that was what their point about Nate Silver is. It's like trying to fundamentally change the polling data model to fix what is essentially, the garbage in, garbage out. Your model is really reliant on the strength of the data. And so I thought that was just really interesting and wanted to get that out there because I do find a lot of people go, my model can't explain this. How do I fix my model? And you can raise your hand and just go, your model is fundamentally beholden to the data you give it, and that is not a flaw. That is just a constraint, and all you have to do is say with your model, this is all I can tell you with my model.
Yeah, absolutely. And as someone who follows a lot of polling Twitter, there's a lot of memes and great stuff on there. They're all opining for low population Senate polling results right now, because there's less polls in these smaller states, for obvious reasons, right? Less resources or whatever. But those individual Senate seats are still really important. And so all these data scientists are saying, we need more polls, and they just don't exist, right? So that's a big problem.
And Nate Silver's even noting the number of people, we're also starting to get skewed, which this might be a good thing for at least getting Democrats to get off their asses and try harder, which is, a lot of people are giving up on landlines or won't answer the phone, right? Caller ID is more prevalent. So the people that are going to answer the phone and actually answer a survey or a poll might just be older people. And by the way, those are going to skew Republican. So it might actually get people more nervous because they'll say, oh my goodness, they're saying this. And it's like, no, that's just a weakness of the poll. And it's hard to get people on the internet. And then a lot of ways that the internet, I have not answered a Google Ads survey seriously ever. And I have gotten petty that there are times where a Google Ads survey pops up, like Basketball Reference, it does it. And I'm like, I'm going to answer every question. I'm going to think about my answers so you can't prove that I'm lying, right? Because you can like switch up. You could ask the same question twice, switch up the order, and just see if the person's picking randomly. So I'll actually read the questions, and I'm like, I'm going to lie about being a farmer that wants to buy a tractor. And I'm going to make up a brand. I'm going to make up a thing. I'm going to make up income. I'm going to give you bad data because I'm so pissed that you interrupted my day with this survey that I'm not going to give you useful data. So that's an interesting place that we're going with polling data, where as the data gets noisier and noisier, we just have to accept that as a constraint instead of, like I said, this is bringing it back to basketball. I've seen so many people try and turn plus minus data or lineup data into something. We just noticed that about the Golden State Warriors, right? You have one lineup that I would say has a sample size significant to look at. And that, for what it's worth, that one lineup says, hey, playing your big players is good, right? Curry, Durant, Green, Damian Jones, Klay Thompson looks really good. But what I'll give you is the Hamptons 5, which was the greatest thing since sliced bread last season, looks terrible right now. They're negative 18.2 points in 14 and a half minutes. Do I believe that's going to hold up? Absolutely not. But I don't think you have a sample size to check it yet.
It's not a lot of minutes.
And you've always been really good about that, where we've talked like that's less than a game's worth of minutes. And if the Lakers lose a game, if the Warriors, Lawyers, that's a funny name, if the Warriors lose a game to the Denver Nuggets, are you really, and you weren't, are you really going to say, oh my goodness, the sky is falling? Now, of course, I crowned the Denver Nuggets king, and then they lost to the Lakers, but is what it is. All right, let's finish this up with the Jimmy Butler saga, which is just really, there's a lot of interesting stuff to go on here. I want to rehash a point that I've talked a lot about on this show, and I know back in the day got me banned or blocked by Adrian Wojnarowski, which is back in the day, Kevin Draper wrote a really comprehensive piece, I think for the Republic, about how Adrian Wojnarowski...
Might have been Deadspin when he was there.
It was pre-Deadspin. It was right before he joined.
Was it?
Deadspin.
Okay.
And in fact, it speaks a lot. I'm a huge fan of Kevin Draper. It speaks a lot to his character that he basically gave the story. He had a job before Deadspin, and he could have given, I'm assuming he could have given the story to Deadspin, but he gave it to them. So he's a good guy. And then also just another weird Kevin Draper shout out. There's been a lot of news coming up how Facebook lied about their video metrics and how this screwed over a lot of companies because they essentially pivoted to video while leaving metrics from Facebook. Essentially what Facebook would do is if you watched the video for 3 seconds, they counted you as a user. And the reason this is flawed is Facebook has autoplay just scrolling through your feed. So someone might scroll past a video, hell, even a Boxscore Geeks video, and it'd say, hey, 1,000 people watched your Boxscore Geeks video yesterday. And it's like, no, your video showed up on 1,000 people's feeds and most of them scrolled by and maybe 3 people stayed to watch it. But now a lot of sites listened to that and said, oh, we got to pivot to video because that's much more big than our articles, despite the fact that our articles were really getting more engagement. Kevin Draper back in the day wrote a piece about that too, about the flawed metrics. So we love.
No, I agree, Dre. Everyone I know in the media industry has been saying the same thing, that everyone knew those Facebook numbers were bogus, but they still did the pivot to video and drank the Kool-Aid to try to do that, get that cash. So
rough because, as I understand, so I will stand. And I'm actually curious to hear your thoughts because you have some background with it, right? As I understand it, essentially the advertisers drank the Kool-Aid. And so now you have a really rough position where you go, the stuff advertisers are willing to pay for is video based on these metrics. So if we don't pivot to video, we don't get the advertiser dollars, but we know for a fact no one's watching. And then, of course, what happens eventually is the advertisers go, what the damn hell? You said you were getting 100,000 people to watch your Facebook videos, and we're seeing, very low, click-through rates or whatever. What's going on? And so that was the weird thing. It's kind of like you have to. We've lamented this on the show before, Brian. If you have a client that's paying you and you disagree with your client, you're still in a rough spot because if you don't do what they say, you don't get paid. But sometimes you kind of know, right, I'm going to do what they say, they're going to be unhappy, and then I'm going to get fired.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is tough in every industry where there's innovation. I know this is not the innovator's dilemma. That's a specific thing. But what I mean is, everyone sees this trend. This is where the industry is going. And you have to either decide, am I going to try to get out ahead of that trend, or I'm going to say, no, that's bogus. I'm going to stick with what I'm doing. And if you make the wrong choice, that could sink your whole company.
Exactly. Okay. So anyway, back to Kevin Draper. Back in the day, he wrote.
Sorry, one last thing, Dre. This is my shout out for the show. You've got me thinking about Facebook. Frontline has a 2-part documentary on Facebook. First one came out last night. Second one came out tonight. I'm going to watch that. I'm very excited about it. Frontline is the documentaries you should be watching right now. They are the best.
I've definitely enjoyed a few of those. Like they did one on CTE that I've vastly enjoyed. But he made a piece on Wojnarowski and how essentially Wojnarowski kind of throws darts at the board with some of his guesses, or get very favorable news to certain teams in exchange for scoops, or in some cases kind of creates his own news. In the case of, he says the Rockets are the front runner for this player. And the reason he's saying that is he is being a mouthpiece for the agent, because that means he's going to get access to future stories. And what's weird to me about this is it's just kind of become accepted. And in what's happening right now, the Jimmy Butler saga in Minnesota, he's very unhappy in Minnesota, wanted to leave early season. There's even belief I've heard that Karl Anthony Towns and Jimmy Butler aren't getting along. Karl Anthony Towns said, I'm not going to sign a max deal if you don't get rid of Jimmy Butler. They said, don't worry, we'll get rid of Jimmy Butler. Sign the deal. He signed the deal. And then they basically, like I said, I was talking to Carlos Boozer. I said, well, what are you going to do? You signed the deal, and there's nothing. We're not allowed to sign. You didn't sign anything in writing, because we wouldn't even be allowed to, that says we have to get rid of Jimmy Butler to keep you. So suck it up. But that being said, everybody has kind of accepted in this Jimmy Butler deal that he wants off the Wolves. Some of the Wolves people want him off the Wolves. That Adrian Wojnarowski is kind of doing the bidding maybe of Jimmy Butler's agent or the Rockets or both. And that's weird to me, because it's kind of an accepted convention that we all know at this point. And it's kind of weird media. It's up there to stay political, like with Fox News, where everybody knows Fox News is propaganda, but nobody does anything about it. And in fact, they repeat what I was reading an article or a headline today, Brian, about how that's a problem, where Fox News says something's propaganda, everybody knows it's bullshit. But because people listen to Fox News, now they have to address the news that's on Fox News. And so now the story gets turned into a real story, when really what should have happened is everybody says that's bullshit. And I think it's weird that Wojnarowski and basketball is in the same boat, where Wojnarowski makes news. We all kind of accept that news might be tainted, but then it catches on because you can't not report Wojnarowski in NBA media. That's all I got. It's just kind of weird.
I see what you're saying. I don't know if I can quite get on board, because these days Fox News is just like straight out lies, whereas Wojnarowski is more kind of self-serving. I don't think he's out like lied about anything in public, has he? Maybe he has. I don't know. So maybe I'll give him some of the benefit of the doubt there. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. And I want to go to a different part of this Jimmy Butler story, Dre. I think you said that very well, that last part, which is that I cannot believe Eric Gordon is the deal breaker here.
Okay.
Then this ties into Wojnarowski, right? Like, here's my question to you, Dre. So he and others have reported that, Houston wants to keep Eric Gordon, but Minnesota insists on getting him. Like, who does that benefit, that story getting out?
Interesting. So there's a lot to say here. So first off, the story we've heard first off is that the Rockets were willing to give up like 4 picks. And then what I've heard some people say is essentially what happened is the Rockets offered 4 picks. The Timberwolves rejected it. And then the Rockets leaked that they offered 4 picks. And so now you've got a media battle where you have the fans upset with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Could you really turn down 4 first-round picks for Jimmy Butler? Now, my response on that is, first off, it's still the right move. We still think the Wolves are right to just keep Jimmy Butler for one more season and make a run for the playoffs rather than give up on him like Kevin Love. But what I also find amusing is, first off, I didn't realize this about the first-round picks. I believe Dennis Rodman caused it. The Cavaliers owner was so bad about trading first-round picks, they instituted a rule, I believe, named after him, which is you are not allowed to trade like multiple picks in successive years. So if the Rockets traded 4 first-round picks, it would be over the course of 7 years. So that, first off, who gives a damn? Second off, 4 first-round picks for a all-star player is just not worth it. I told a friend a metaphor. I was like, let's pretend you had 3 years of a lease left on a Tesla, and I offered you 4 Toyota, let's say 4 Toyota Camrys with 100,000 miles on them for that lease. You pay off the remainder of the lease. I give you those 4 cars. Is that a fair deal? I don't think anybody says yes. So that's essentially the same boat, where this idea that 4 likely mediocre NBA players, if they even make the NBA, is worth 1 Jimmy Butler and the bird rights. Like that's the funny thing. A player I really like is Paul George from last season. Everybody knew Paul George wasn't going to stick around OKC. Everybody knew Paul George was going to LA. OKC had his bird rights. They offered him a really good deal. He's like, hey, I like it here. Maybe I don't want to deal with LA. Maybe I don't want to deal with LeBron. And he stuck around. So if you have Jimmy Butler's bird rights, you have the best shot of rehiring him of anybody in the NBA. So this weird notion that 4 first-round picks is too much for Jimmy Butler is just hilarious to me. And then, as you were saying, the other rumor coming out is Eric Gordon. being the sticking point. Eric Gordon is we've never thought is good. We thought he was a horrible signing by the Rockets when they picked him up, and he's only getting worse. I agree with you. It's actually more likely that the Rockets are playing a PR battle of saying we're offering Eric Gordon for Jimmy Butler as opposed to the alternative. But maybe it is the alternative, and if it is, we don't know. As I mentioned, there was some great feedback in the weekly wrap-up post between a couple commenters talking back and forth. And there's a very real question where if Jimmy Butler is Eric Gordon is the sticking point for Jimmy Butler, what the hell is Daryl Morey doing?
Yeah, exactly. And so I have a little something here. This is an ESPN article from, I think, today. No, it's from a couple of days ago. It's, let's bring it up here. It's Malika Andrews with contributions from Wojnarowski. And it says, Houston has offered 4 future first-round picks, but that package doesn't include Eric Gordon, who'd be mandatory for Minnesota in any proposed deal, league sources said. Thibodeau wants maximum return on players to help Minnesota get back to the playoffs. So according to this ESPN reporting, Minnesota does value Eric Gordon as a good veteran that would replace Jimmy Butler for their playoff run. So, yeah, the way this article makes it sounds, both teams are kind of making bad basketball decisions and fighting some PR battle, which is weird to me.
Oh, all right. Anyway, I got nothing.
Yeah, we just need to see what happens in the end with this, because right now this seems like a bunch of smoke.
Oh, let's just move on. Really weird. I apologize. This is very much like the Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series, right? Just falling apart, falling on their face. I'm so sorry. This is being up 4. I thought we had a great podcast going there, Brian. I fell on my face. That's being up 4-0, and then can you believe they lost that game? So that's my subtle shot. So that's my subtle segue to my shout out, which is the Agony of Defeat podcast, because they talked baseball and it was amazing. One observation they made that I thought was amazing, and I don't know if other people have made this about the World Series, Brian. This year's World Series was the Los Angeles Dodgers versus the Red Sox. And why that's cool is the Los Angeles Dodgers, now admittedly I think they were Brooklyn Dodgers at the time, right, were the first team to integrate in Major League Baseball, and the Red Sox were the last. So that's a funny story. Now, of course, sad story is the racist team with the most money finally wins because they're willing to chase money even over racism. So whatever is what it is. So that's my shout out, the Agony of Defeat podcast that I've already said. And then I think I said all the points I had about it in the show organically. So that'll be mine. I think you have a couple of shout outs, Brian, and that can be our show.
No, I already got mine in. Oh, no, I do have one more. You're right. I have one more. I actually have an anti-shout out to the Golden State Warriors as well. So as much as I love them on the court and they look great, and yeah, I was hinting at this earlier, this may be their best team yet, I do have some problems with what they're doing off the court. And let's bring up this Bleacher Report article here. Here we go. And the headline is, Warriors to pay estimated $40 million in Oracle Arena debt after ruling. So Oracle Arena, where they're playing right now in Oakland, got renovated some years ago, and they have a deal with the county who owns it. The Warriors did to help renovate it and pay for some of those. But of course, what have they done? Similar things to what other teams have done, is to leave that arena before it's even been paid off. And of course, the Warriors are doing that, right? They're going to San Francisco next year to the new arena that they're building there. And it's even gotten their announcer, Bob Fitzgerald, booed at an event talking about how they're leaving Oakland. It's kind of an awkward thing here in the Bay Area, right? So anyway, on top of that, the Warriors were ruled against, which is great. They are not going to stick this extra $40 million to the taxpayers of Alameda County like me. So yeah, that $40 million is going to get clawed back. So yeah, don't dine and dash, Warriors. Pay those debts.
Well, this is what we said. There's like Field of Schemes, I think it's the Twitter account. I think they wrote a book about it. We've talked about this forever, and most sports economists agree that an arena or stadium is a horrible, horrible investment for a city. And it's such, the trickle-down economics that is bullshit at this point. It's so annoying that the Ayn Rand trickle-down, pull yourself up crap, don't tax us, caught on and is stuck around in the United States for as long as it has, because the idea is you give millionaires, billionaires in this case, a bunch of money to build a stadium. They build a stadium that increases, infrastructure and people coming into your city, and that increases revenue. That has never been the case. And what we notice time and time again is, and this again, Kevin Draper, always shout out to Kevin Draper. He noted that basically in the NBA, you talk teams talk cities into buying a stadium or paying or financing a stadium for them. And then after about 20 years, they're like, we want a new stadium. So before, and like as the example was the Thunder's new stadium, right, in Oklahoma City, it's like by the time their lease actually gets even close to making money, they're going to be demanding a new stadium. So that's a problem. You sell this notion of, here's what's going to happen. We're going to lease the stadium from you. It's going to make a ton of money, and then it's going to pay for itself. And then basically by the time it's paid for itself, they leave. And of course, an empty stadium's worth nothing, right? If you don't have the Thunder, no one wants to pay to go see it. So, and no one else is going to pay anywhere near as much as an NBA team. So this makes me a little happy because I was actually praising the Warriors for, I believe, if I understand, the San Francisco stadium is funded by themselves.
It is. Yeah.
So I was, it's kind of weird to go, wow, this team's doing right. So it actually makes me kind of happy to go, yes, I can still be angry because even this team that's paying for their own stadium, part of how they're quote unquote paying for it was by trying to leave the bill to the old stadium. So I'm glad they didn't get out of it. They're worth over $1 billion. They're owned by a billionaire. Why the hell should they take $40 million from taxpayers? So I agree. I agree with the pro shout out to Alameda County is what you were saying, right? And the anti shout out against the Warriors. Anyway, this is the Boxscore Geeks show. If you met us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live. Tell me you watched the Warriors game at least, Brian. Tell me that's what you were doing yesterday.
I did end up watching that game, yes.
Okay, because we were going live every Monday, 9:30 p.m., twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. Brian canceled yesterday to watch a historic game, so we'll give it to you, Brian.
I knew it was going to be historic ahead of time. Amazing. No, actually, I had some other, I was on injured reserve yesterday, and watching that game was a nice, side benefit.
But so most Mondays, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. We also have the podcast you can find on iTunes and Stitcher as the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote, the same thing you hear on every other podcast helps us out. And then, of course, if you want to catch the video recaps, you can catch that on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers, co-host Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian, with us in spirit. Patrick Mint, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. Have a good week. Hopefully the sample size isn't too small next week. Talk to you then.